Hey there, welcome in. My name is Avril, and in this corner of the internet, we chat about writing, life, and whatever else comes to mind. And today, I wanted to do something a little bit different. When I was filming my intro video, I realized that I never really went into detail about my current project, and I figured since I have a little more time today and I was going to be doing my makeup for a different video, I figured, let's have a little fun, and I would introduce my project while doing my makeup for that video. So this is Avril from the future, and I'm going to now pop it over to Avril from the past. And of course, while we're hanging out together today, bear in mind that I am not a makeup artist. This is just kind of my own approach. A little bit maybe out of order or not the correct way of doing it, and that is okay. This is just what works for me. And this is actually a perfect example of that, because when I'm doing my makeup, the first thing that I actually do is mark out the wings for my eyeliner. Now, I don't do the full wing typically, but I find that it is easier for me to make sure they are even and clean up any mistakes before I do my eyeshadow and any other stuff I'm doing to the eyes. And like I said, this is just kind of a template. It also kind of helps with gauging where all of the other eye makeup products are going to go. For my eyeshadow primer, I actually have two that I use. I use the Too Faced Shadow Insurance as my base, and then the NYX eyeshadow base for more pigmented areas. And for today, because I am about to film a little book chat about a recent read, I thought it'd be fun to kind of go in and do an eyeshadow look inspired by the cover. So we're leaning toward a lot of oranges today, which is exciting for me because I don't get to really play with those colors all that much. But enough about that look. Let's get into talking a little bit about mine, because that is what we're here for today. So I tend to actually jump around between multiple projects at one time. But the one that I would consider to be the primary focus as of right now is called A Tided Love. And that is actually the little aesthetic board that I have up here. So A Tided Love follows Caroline, who is a widow about 2 years after the death of her husband. And she goes back to this resort town she had visited a few years ago with her family. And when she had been there, she was about 19. And at the time, she had met this guy named Thomas, and they really hit it off, but it didn't really go anywhere. In part because Caroline's family is very adamant about her finding an eligible suitor and marrying for money and status and, all those important things. Whereas, of course, Caroline wanted to marry for love, but she was also very naive and really felt the pressure from her family, so she didn't really pursue anything with Thomas as much as she would have wanted to. And then for the palette today, by the way, I am using the Revolution Desert Desire Forever Flawless palette. I love this line so much. I think I probably have about a dozen of the palette. Thomas didn't really know what he wanted to do with his life. He was kind of at an entry-level job, hadn't really made a name for himself, didn't have that status that Caroline's family was looking for. And that is actually one of the things that I need to kind of figure out for myself a little bit. And originally there was also going to be kind of an age gap component to this project, but that kind of fell from the wayside a little bit. So Caroline's family was vacationing in this town, but Thomas lived there pretty much full time. And about 2 weeks before they were supposed to leave town, she kind of gives him an ultimatum, basically, what are we? What is our deal here? Are we gonna go for this or not? Because there had definitely been a little bit of flirtation between the two of them. At the time, Caroline had been pretty reserved and honestly a little naive when it came to flirting. So she wasn't exactly sure if she was reading him right. And meanwhile, Thomas wasn't sure if she reciprocated his feelings. So her kind of bringing this up to him and asking, what's our deal? What is going on? I'm leaving this town in 2 weeks. So if we're going to do this, we need to kind of figure out what we are. And that really throws him through a loop. Because he gets so thrown off by this, he doesn't respond, at least not immediately. She realizes, oh, I messed up here. And I clearly misread the room, and she just kind of walks off at that point. And of course, he feels horrible about this because he did like her that way. But at that point, he kind of decides that he needs to give her a little bit of space and come back to it with a level head. But of course, things are never that easy. So Thomas ends up getting a letter. There's been a death in the family, and he needs to go back to Kent or Derbyshire or wherever I had him from. I honestly do not recall at this present time. But he ends up having to leave town. So he leaves a letter for Caroline, basically just saying, hey, here's the situation, and I am so sorry I'm having to ditch town like this. This is definitely not how I wanted this to go. And while it wasn't meant to be an outright confession of feelings, it was more of an, hey, I do want to have this conversation kind of letter. Basically asking for permission to begin a long-distance relationship with her. Now I'm actually going to take a quick break here to do my eyeliner because I don't know if I can talk and do eyeliner at the same time, so we'll be back in about 2 minutes. My theory about eyeliner is that as long as it looks even, it looks intentional. And I'm not going to mess with it anymore today. As luck would have it, that letter never actually reaches Caroline. And she takes that to mean that he was really offended by her assuming that he liked her and clearly didn't feel the same way. And what was she thinking? So she and her family leave as planned, and she and Thomas end up losing contact. Caroline does eventually marry, and she marries a man that was basically everything her parents would have wanted for her. It wasn't necessarily a marriage of love. She did appreciate him as a human, but it wasn't anything romantic. And I think at that point, she was also kind of writing off the idea of romance. As the eldest daughter, it was her job essentially to secure a good match so that it would open up more connections for her sisters to, in turn, make good matches and good marriages and all of that. So she had just kind of resigned herself to this marriage. But of course, if being widowed at a young age wasn't hard enough, there's also the fact that her husband died because he literally took a bullet for a priest. And she eventually gets this title of the martyr's widow thrown at her. And she is raised to this other level in her hometown. And because of that, she's put under more pressure to uphold the Sinclair name because she married into this family. All right, that actually does not look that even on the eyeliner. I'm going to go back in and just kind of tweak that a little bit because I'm looking at myself in the camera here, and yeah, that is way, way off. So Caroline's mother-in-law was very convinced that she was only ever in it for the connections and the money, never mind the, ignoring the fact that her husband actually did love her. So Caroline's mother-in-law is very afraid that Caroline is just going to essentially besmirch the family name and is kind of just off to do her own thing and doesn't really want to uphold or respect her husband's memory. So by this point, Caroline had already been kind of really under a strict thumb. And that was only made worse with the death of her husband. Fast forward a few years, and she ends up going back to this resort town she had visited a few years before. And of course, she does run into Thomas. Thomas, meanwhile, had been rather unlucky in love. He was never really able to put a finger on why, although later recollections would have him realize it was because he was always comparing everybody to Caroline, and that nobody would ever measure up to her. He did end up engaged at one point, but that got broken off. Basically, he was rather uninvolved in the process and didn't really share in his fiance's enthusiasm for the whole thing. And she kind of took that to mean, oh, you're not really invested in this and you're only doing it to do it. And that all transpires about 3 days before Caroline gets back in town. The two end up reconnecting at a party, and it goes about as you would expect it to. There's that initial awkwardness to the first encounter of, I haven't seen you in 10 years, oh my god. And then it kind of devolves into a bit of an argument. because on the one hand, she never replied to his letter, but she had never gotten the letter. So there's that layer to it. Meanwhile, there's also the fact that Caroline could have written to him and didn't. Now, as we enter into this phase of the makeup, I am still getting over blush blindness. I am still learning how to use blush. I've only really introduced it to my whole routine about 2 or 3 weeks ago, so we're learning. Caroline ends up in the mind of, yeah, no, I made the right call by not pursuing this. And even though she still kind of has feelings for him a little bit, she's not going to actively pursue anything at this time. And meanwhile, Thomas is realizing that the whole reason nothing ever works out for him in romance is because he's always comparing people to Caroline. A little bit more what could possibly go wrong. And that kind of puts them on this path to kind of hashing things out and potentially starting something again. In all of this, Thomas's friend Giles, who is the absolute darling of my writing group, Giles has decided that he is going to personally take down the town gossip monger. So think your Lady Whistledown kind of figure, your Gossip Girl kind of figure, and he is now on this crusade to unmask her and has been trying to pull Thomas in. And he eventually does give in because of Caroline. Actually, that came out okay. That's the first. Forgot my concealer, so we're going to do that real quick. Meanwhile, of course, Caroline has not quite been ignoring the letters from her mother-in-law, but she hasn't been quite expedient in her replies either. And that ends up prompting her mother-in-law to personally come down and be like, hey, what are you doing here? And that, of course, is right after she and Thomas kind of begin to work things out. And on the one hand, yeah, why should she at this point care what her now ex-mother-in-law thinks? But there is the issue that Caroline is still residing at the estate, and she has a younger sister who is kind of engaged to be engaged. So there's that concern as well, where if Caroline, in any way displeases her mother-in-law, that is going to fall through. So it once again results in Caroline having to choose between duty and desire, and do I pursue this thing I really want with Thomas, or do I once again give into the demands and need of my family? Now, the whole reason Thomas gets kind of pulled into this thing with the gossip monger and Giles and trying to unmask her is that for pretty much his entire engagement, because he was engaged to the gossip monger's favorite topic of discussion, he has unfortunately gained a little bit of notoriety in that circle, where every other publication is about him in some capacity. And he usually brushes that off as, yeah, whatever, it'll die down eventually. This whole end of the engagement is a brand new thing, and therefore she's just going to milk it for all it's worth, and eventually everybody will move on and forget it. But that is all, of course, until he and Caroline start to become a thing. Because once they become a thing, the gossip becomes on a whole nother level and really begins to target Caroline. And not in a way of like, oh yeah, and here's what this girl was wearing. And it becomes really vitriolic. It starts to really feel like a personal attack. And that is kind of the point where Thomas says, all right, I'm in, and agrees to take down this gossip monger. And I'm actually in a bit of a weird place in this project right now. It's not quite a first draft because I had already written a few chapters of it beforehand, but between reworking the outline and needing to fix a few things, what ended up happening was that I did kind of start rewriting before finishing the first draft and reworking the outline a couple times and kind of getting to this point now where I'm still on the first draft, but I have a better idea of where I'm taking it. And also, this is my first time really using setting powder, so, because I've noticed with my past videos that I look kind of like, not quite like sweaty, but like very dewy on camera, so I figured I would give this a try to see if that helps. I usually don't use a setting powder. I'm more of a setting spray. I like that dewy finish, but on camera, it's just not, I'm realizing it's not the finish I want. So I am trying a mattifying powder today to see how that goes. But as it stands, I am now realizing also that I'm going to rework the first chapter again. And it actually came up because of the book that I'm about to film a video for. So I kind of realized through the character in that book that the reason I wasn't quite clicking with Caroline is that she is too immediately fixated on getting back with Thomas, which kind of contradicts this whole thing of the back and forth argument. And, you know, she's immediately, it's like, as soon as they get into town, she's very much oh, I wonder if Thomas is still here. I wonder if I'll like run into him. What if I ran into him? That would be like, I don't know how that would go, but like, I wouldn't be opposed to it. So trying to rework that a little bit in the next draft. I think right now my plan is going to be just kind of a rewrite for chapter 1 and then not quite rewriting everything else to match right now, but I just want to like rewrite that first chapter again because then I can kind of use that going forward to kind of figure out her motives. Right, but I do believe that is a wrap on my makeup, and honestly enough of a wrap on A Tided Love in its current form. So I'm going to go ahead and change into what I'm wearing for the actual video I'm about to film, and I will see you in the future. And that was probably the most disjointed, unorganized way of introducing a project to the channel, but you know, I really liked the idea of just sitting down and hanging out and chatting over makeup. So I might do this again in the future when I have another update about the project. Maybe this becomes a periodic thing we do on the channel. We'll find out when we get there. But thank you so much for spending a little bit of your day here with me in this corner of the internet. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.